Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome back to the Quarrels About Morals podcast. I'm John Rawls, your host, and author of the best-selling work A Theory of Justice, an interesting and thought-provoking read sure to...
John, get back to the point. It wasn't a good book anyway. Now, on the other hand, my book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, explaining the correct philosophy, utilitarianism, is far more...
Excuse you. Here today to contribute their somewhat expert philosophical opinions are guests Jeremy Bentham,
That would be me.
Immanuel Kant,
Guten Tag.
and ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. Welcome.
Yo, 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 it's Socrates, bro, here to spill some major moral tea.
Ugh, Socrates, your mid-afterlife crisis is quite tiresome.
Thank you for having us, John. I, Immanuel Kant, appreciate your acknowledging my dignity as a human. Though I must ask, was your desire to invite me here out of inclination or out of duty?
Bah, that don't matter. What matters is that you are giving me a platform to express my exceedingly accurate opinions, and thereby bringing the most pleasure to the most people.
Ugh, Jeremy, stop acting like a Russian doll and being full of yourself.
Please, gentlemen, let's get back to the point. Today, in this special edition of the podcast, we are discussing the moral implications of the rules discussed in the Radnor High School Student Handbook.
This handbook is the governing document for the students at Radnor, serving as a set of guidelines for proper conduct. The obedience of the students is essential to the functioning of the school as a whole.
The section on violations focuses on harmful actions that threaten the Radnor High School environment, ranging from minor infractions through major infractions.
Today, we will be focusing on the morality of drug-related violations, with the added twist of the absence policy. All four of us will be examining hypotheticals under the lenses of our very different philosophies.
Lit fam, let's start. Imagine that you're an impoverished student at Radnor High School, struggling to support both your family and yourself. Sucks, am I right, dudes? Your sibling has missed more than 5 days of school and needs a doctor's note for their absences to be excused in compliance with the student handbook. Wow, not swaggy at all. You need the money to pay for a doctor's visit for your sick little bro, since you cannot afford health care. Are the student handbook policies moral here, bros?
Stop it with these frivolities, Socrates. No amount of hip language will take off centuries of wrinkles on your...
Don't come for me, bro.
We should really get back to the hypothetical. The handbook states that only medical excuses signed by a physician may be accepted after 5 consecutive absences, and this is on page 37. This absences policy is inherently classist in a country that does not offer universal health care. A student who cannot afford health care has ailments just as valid as those who can. If students do not know their socioeconomic standing before entering Radnor High School, a group of them would never choose to enforce this rule, as they could potentially end up in the situation of this ill, destitute student.
Though the struggle of the student is valid, I would argue that this rule should remain in place. The overall happiness it would bring to the society and the school culture as a whole if students cannot lie about their medical absences, and the pleasure resulting from the overall order that ensues, would far outweigh the temporary distress that it may cause to a few individuals.
Bentham, I strongly disagree with your opinion. Holding students to this obligation is entirely unethical. People can come to the rational conclusion that forcing a medical employee to validate your absences is immoral. Students can come to the same conclusion that lying about absences is not even in question, and thus the school can rest assured that their students are taking the critical break to recover and not skipping school. Slay Immanuel. Wow, if only everyone was as dope as me. Anyways, the school forcing students to have a doctor's note for medical absences exceeding 5 days is unethical, homies. It takes away the hypothetical sick student's ability to choose the way they spend their money. This violates a human's innate ability to choose and to follow their conscience. All this governing is not good for a morally sound school, broskies. Now, building on that, let's say that the student was anonymously donated 1 ounce of marijuana, enough to pay for an uninsured doctor's visit as well as a note. If the student were to sell these drugs to a fellow student to pay for their sibling's doctor visit, would this be ethically valid? Keep in mind that we are evaluating the morality of this decision and the morality of the handbook's guidelines rather than legality. Is it morally right to violate the strict drug policy in the Radnor High School Student Handbook to help your sibling?
Which rules should be taken into account for such violations? Which rules are moral given the context? Should the context matter?
To sell drugs to get an absence excused, I would say that is totes immoral and a clear breach of the social contract, bro. In order to show gratitude for a fan-freaking-tastic society for all that it has provided, the student should not sell drugs. The prohibition of marijuana is a law agreed upon by society, dude, and therefore the distribution of it would be not cool, particularly because of all the violent repercussions and criminal activity. It is difficult to navigate this paradox of the importance of individual liberties and importance of the laws, but in this case, the laws of society take precedence for sure, and that's the T, sis.
On the matter of marijuana, I would unfortunately have to disagree with you. Both the rule and the law are clearly in the wrong here, not the student selling drugs to help their ill sibling. The prohibition of marijuana and the severity to which it has been enforced has both racist and classist undertones. It has led to quite unfair incarcerations and sentences targeted against poor and ethnic minority marijuana users despite its widespread use amongst a variance of people. Merely on the basis of the current privilege dynamics, an anonymous group of citizens would not choose to enforce this law or the RHS rule if they didn't know their standing in society. Thereby, and for that reason alone, I place the blame in this situation on the government rather than the individual.
I can't believe that you try to justify a student selling drugs. Rules are put into place for a reason, to ensure overall pleasure among the school community. A tremendous amount of organized crime and the related suffering goes into the production and distribution of weed, and in continuing the chain of criminal activity by selling the donated weed, one would cause pain certainly surpassing the far lesser pain of a student who would face unexcused absences.
I agree with you, but for an entirely different reason. Selling drugs is unethical regardless of the context. Selling drugs is providing someone with a substance harmful to their body with the expectation of them consuming it. Regardless of the context, such an action would be immoral. In selling the drugs, one is using the other student as a means to the end of acquiring the money. In doing so, one is not recognizing the other student's dignity as a human. It is also unethical in such a situation. It is out of inclination, the inclination to pursue money, as opposed to moral duty, the moral duty to not sell drugs.
Most of you, except on some, have fascinating opinions, and I appreciate your comments. But let's now say that the sibling does not need to see a doctor for a note, but rather because they are terminally ill and will unquestionably die if they do not receive medical treatment. Keep in mind that all of the other conditions are the same. Obviously, my opinion, which is formed on the basis of classism and privilege rather than the nature of the circumstance, is the same. What are your thoughts?
Kitty girls, as I previously discussed, the paradox of the importance of individual liberties and following one's conscience is quite difficult to navigate, my dudes. Given this new fact pattern, I must say that a terminally ill sibling certainly alters the morality of the situation, home slices. When the situation is that extreme, the rules are irrelevant. One must follow their conscience. I personally believe that in this situation, the student is justified to sell drugs, as though it may negatively affect certain others. Marijuana is not a lethal drug, and it would save the life of a child who is sure to die otherwise.
My opinion would also change in this situation, as pleasure it would cause to the recreational marijuana user, and the pleasure it would cause the sibling and the sibling's friend, and the entire hypothetical family at surviving the illness would far outweigh the minor neurological damage for the purchaser of the weed.
This altered fact pattern does not change my opinion of the matter. It is still morally wrong to sell drugs to pay for a doctor's visit or note. This blatant disrespect for a human being's dignity in this situation far outweighs the benefits of a proper treatment. Pure practical reasons suggest that the person selling the drugs can come to terms with the fact that they are harming another human being, as well as disregarding not only the handbook but also the Pennsylvania state laws, therefore persuading them to view their actions as immoral.
What if the student were to get caught selling the illegal substance and had to serve detention, and the student were to skip the detention to care for their sick little sibling? Would they be forced to face the consequences and repercussions for missing the detention? My personal opinion is that the student should not have to face as harsh repercussions for skipping detention. Just because the student is from a lower socioeconomic household who can't afford to care for their sick little sibling doesn't mean that their older child should get punished for skipping the detention. I do understand that there needs to be some consequences for this act, but I feel it should be lesser for the student compared to a student who does not have a viable excuse.
Here I agree and feel the student should rebel against society, following their conscience and valuing their individual rights. Pretty edgy if you ask me, dog. As my bro John said, the older child shouldn't have to be punished for the family's low socioeconomic standings. In this situation, one should value their personal rights over everything that was given to them by society, my man. The safety of the ill child, both in the home and physical, should be valued higher than avoiding a violation. Oh,
Well, I have to disagree. One comes to the understanding that skipping detention is wrong, no matter the circumstances. If everyone deemed the rules as mere guidelines based on their circumstances, the rules would not be upheld. Although the rules seem to not matter at the school level, the fundamental rule represents the compliance to the social contract as a whole. Without abeyance to the rule, the educations of thousands of students, as well as the workplace of hundreds of faculty members, would fall prey to complete and utter chaos.
On that note, we are out of time for today. Thank you for all of your input, philosophers, and thank you, dear listener, for tuning into this special episode of Quarrels About Morals. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and give this episode a big thumbs up. And if you want to be notified every time I upload, make sure you hit that notification bell.